To get the legs moving inside of Harmony Essentials, we're going to be setting up some layer parenting, and then we'll have a repositioning peg that we will use to move the parts around. Currently our character only has a single leg. We'll be adding in a second leg, but because the second leg is going to be very similar to the first, it makes sense to get the first leg all set. So looking at the first leg, we can see how it's composed of a number of different layers. We'll turn those on. So we have the upper leg, the knee, which becomes a patch between the upper leg and the lower leg. Then there is the heel or back of the foot that will attach on. There is the toes, and then we have the patch for the foot so that when you bend the foot, it doesn't leave a gap showing. The first thing that we can do is set all of the positioning pivot points for each of our given layers. Now looking at this, it's important that often animation will be turned on, so we need to turn off animate because we don't want to start creating keyframes yet. We just want to have our layers get their positioning pegs or pivot points reset. So it's appropriate because if I go grab the upper leg right now and go to rotate it, we will see that it's rotating from the center of the screen, and that is definitely what we don't want. The tool that we use is the Advanced Animation Rotate tool. If you don't see that on one of your toolbars, you need to select Advanced Animation. So sometimes it will be down by your timeline. I like to have it up by my camera view, and I choose Advanced Animation. It pops up. Now I grab the Rotate tool and position this at the point that I imagine the leg is going to swing from. So it's going to swing from the hip right about there. Now I'm going to move down my layers, and as I do that, I can use H and J on the keyboard to speed up this process. Now I will set the hips pivot point in the middle, working my way down, position the knee in the middle for the knee. The knee doesn't matter too much because it's not going to move independently. The lower leg does matter, and it does need to swing out from the knee. The foot needs to swing from the ankle area, so we need to imagine where that movement is going to go. So I can put it there and see if that is what I want. And I think that's going to work okay. Now move down to the next layer for the toe so we can get the bend of the foot. It's going to be pretty much centered over that patch that we have underneath, and we will put the patch in the same spot, even though we're not really concerned too much about moving the patch, but it is going to move as part of our animation process. So now that I have my pivot points set for each of my layers, I need to start building up the parent-child relationship between my layers. And we can do that where we want everything to be a child of the upper leg. So when I move the upper leg, I want all the other parts to go with. So if I shift-click, not the ground, but the rest of the leg parts, and drag that onto my upper leg layer, it now creates a parent-child relationship. We can see where it's now indented. Now the knee and lower leg are going to be parented there, but I want now my foot layers, the heel through toe patch, that to be attached to the lower leg, and then we will need the toes and toe patch attached to the heel. So that is going to allow us to now move the different body parts around and build our animation. So just seeing how this works, if I work with the transform tool and start moving parts around, if I click on the upper leg, it selects all of the leg parts. If I click on the lower leg, it selects everything from the knee down, and we can see how we're creating that bend. Don't want to break the leg too badly. If I grab the foot, let's try again. Grab the foot, I can rotate it. I can grab the toes and rotate that as well. So as we can see, we can reposition all of the parts to create our animation, and I hit undo a few too many times. We'll pull that back over onto the lower leg and the foot layer onto the heel. So now that is configured. So we have all of our parts connected. I do find I get better success setting the pivot points and then creating the parent-child relationship between the layers, that everything seems to maintain its correct positioning a little bit better, so I do prefer to do it that way. So that now gives me a leg that is ready to start animating. Now that I've done that, I'm going to collapse this so it's easier to work with, and we can see that we have this lower leg here. Now, or upper leg. Now I'm going to right click on it, and one of the options we see when we right click is duplicate selected layers. Now when I do that, it now gives me a new layers, and everything will have a 1 on it. Now these are going to be the back leg. The original front leg will be the front leg, and I want to put the hips in between. So now I can just drag that in between. So we have the front leg, the hips, and the back leg. If I turn off those top two and go back to what is now my back leg, and I'm going to work through the layers, I want to just recolor that a little bit. So as I do that, I am going to have a new color. So in the animation process, it's going to be a little bit easier to see what is happening while I am animating, so I can better gauge that whole process. So now I have colored all of my layers for the back leg, and I have the front leg. I'm getting really close to being ready to animate. The next thing that we want to do to pull this off is we want to attach these two leg layers and the hips to a peg. A peg is a new concept we haven't looked at before. The peg gives us an ability to control the different animation characteristics of our layer, or groups of layers that are then attached to this parent peg. So if I move the peg, everything moves along with it. So when we're working in Harmony Essentials, we're a little bit limited at that. We have to use the parenting of layers to attach things together instead of parenting of pegs. If we were in Harmony Premium and had the network node-based view, we could be connecting our different nodes together using pegs, and that's just a different way of constructing our models, and it's a different way of creating our movements through our timeline. Both work, both have pros and cons, but if you're working in Essentials, we don't really have that ability, that super flexibility that we have when we're working in the network node view. So I've now clicked and added a peg. It added upper leg to that, and now I have the hips and lower leg, and I want to put those on it as well, and take the front leg, and I will just drag that up to the top of my stack here. So we have the front leg, the hips, and the lower leg. They are all now attached to this peg that I'm going to rename reposition P for peg. It is now getting me off to a good start. I just need to turn my other layers back on. Now I collapse onto the peg, and I'm no longer going to be filling, but instead I'm getting ready to start animating. So I can turn back on the animate button. I am going to click over to my transform, turn off animate one more time. I am going to reposition the peg. Now it's common to sometimes a main positioning peg for a character may be placed between the feet, and we line it up that way so it's attached to the ground plane. It's pretty open as to where you want to do it. When you have a full character, so the rest of the torso, arms, and a head, then you decide, do you attach it to the center of the body, to the base of the pelvis, top of the head, between the feet. All of those are viable options. So now that has been positioned, I am going to then once again turn on animate so we're ready to go and start adding in keyframes. At this point I will hit F6. It adds a keyframe for that first frame. If I open up and look at all of my layers, I will see that it added a keyframe for everything, which is pretty awesome. Now we don't really need to see the rest of our layers as we are animating. Now, with this first position, I am going to start out my walk cycle at the point of walking where both feet are in contact with the ground with the heel strike. So the front leg is going to be in the heel strike position as my starting position, because that's just a really convenient and easy way to begin our walk movement. So with the transform tool active, if I click on the upper leg, we will see it selects the upper leg, and I can now rotate that upper leg out. Now I can click on the back leg, and I can rotate that out, and we'll see right away that the height isn't going to work terribly well unless I bend at the toes. Now that we've done that, I can click here for the reposition peg and just move the whole figure down. Go back to the upper leg there, and we are at the heel strike. So that is a good first pose. Now when we're setting up these poses, it works best if I go one keyframe at a time and work my way across, and then if the timing is too quick, then I stretch out those keyframes, I move them in the timeline, creating more space. The computer will tween the motion in between those, and then I can add in additional keyframes and tweak it. Now, a few things that are important to keep in mind. When I go to frame 2, I'll see, oh my gosh, it all disappeared. Whoa, what do we do? And what we have to remember is we do have to extend the exposure for this layer. So I'm going to just go out in the timeline here, and I will hit function key F5. That extends it out. Now if I open it back up, we'll see, hey look, there is my whole project. Now going back to frame 2. If at frame 2 I start moving around body parts, so I click here and adjust, click here, and I don't move everything, just some things, and then continue that to frame 3, 4, or 5, it's all going to work until I spread the keyframes out. When I spread the keyframes out, we're going to get all kinds of really weird things where our parts are going to fall apart on screen as we are working. So it's really important that we are adding keyframes to every layer at every keyframe pose. If we do that, we're going to have a more consistent end product. So to do that, I click with everything collapsed or closed on the peg layer and hit function key F6. That now adds in my keyframe, and the next thing I can do is figure out how I want this to move. Now what I want to do is to pull the leg down here, because from the heel strike we're landing on the leg, and we'll put the leg under here, and then we'll figure out the back leg in just a moment. Now if I turn on onion skinning, we can see that is where the leg was. So click, and we need to reposition the whole model, because what we need to be doing is moving between these two positions. And we can quickly control that off the keyboard using the comma and period key to go forward and back on our frames. Now as I am stepping forward down onto the foot, the back leg, while it was down, is going to start swinging through. And as part of that swing through, we can now start to move the body parts, adding in the necessary bend and flex for our given layers. Now, you can see our two poses. We can see we have keyframes for everything. That's exactly what we want. And now, as I am stepping down, I'm going to hit F6 once more. And on this particular pose, the leg, we're going to be shifting the hip forward, bend at the ankle. Actually, or I'm going to do it a little bit different this time and rise up on the toe. So I've adjusted that front leg. Now move forward. So what we want to avoid is we don't want the figure to be sliding at this point, because then we start to create this moonwalk scenario, and that starts to look really awkward, and we don't want that, because then it looks like the character is sliding across the ground instead of walking. and we want to be walking. So now, step going forward, and the next pose that I'm going to take is to extend my foot out. So function key F6, and we will rotate the back leg, and I am going to rotate the front leg, put a little more bend in the foot, and with this we need to then reposition the character, and finally function key F6 will be rotating everything down into the ground. So as I am doing that, I'm going to do a little rotation. And now let's see if we can convince the back leg to bend. And if my toe is here, a little more bend. Don't want to break the foot. So it's really a process of finessing and adjusting the parts until we achieve the alignment that we are looking for. Step, pass through, and strike. Now, something to keep in mind as we do this, we don't have to have 100% symmetry between the front leg and the back leg as our character is moving. So if I bend a little bit at the knee, then I can put a little bit of bend in the toe. Now I just need to get that toe to line up, because if I fail to do that, what's going to happen is our character will slide backwards at that step. And now we can see we have achieved half of the walk. And continuing forward, go F6 for the new pose. Do a little rotate action. A little rotate, a lot of rotate as we're coming down on that foot. This leg is going to start the swing. Foot will bend. Knee is going to start picking up behind. Click on the peg, line it up. And going back and forth, we can see how it's starting to look pretty good. The next pose from here that we want to make will, of course, now be our pass-through. So function key F6. And do a little bit of rotate, a little bit of rotate, a little bit of rotate. So a lot of it is going to be that rotation. Now we can see, click on the peg, line the foot back up. As we do that, the back leg is starting, or the front leg is starting to swing through. And the next pose that I'm going to take is to create the reaching out pose as the character is swinging forward. And this leg is now going to be swinging back a little bit. A little bend in the foot. So this is getting ready to then land in that first pose. So bend, step, and I want to, I think, do a little rotate and pull a little more. Bend in the leg there. A little bend on the foot, pulling it up. Grab the peg and position the foot so it's in the correct spot. Now if I turn off onion skinning, I can also move this over so it's just on a tight loop and hit play. And we can see how it's going really, really fast. Now we're at 24 frames per second. We could cheat and maybe drop it down to 6 temporarily. And I think we're getting pretty close to having something work. And as I said, we can, once we have the basic walking down, we can start stretching things out. Now if I put it back to 24 frames per second, grab these keyframes and move them over. We can just grab chunks of keyframes, move them over. And as we do this, we're effectively slowing down the animation process. And you'll notice that we now have some in-between keyframes occurring. As well. And if I need to tweak or adjust the position of any of those, I can certainly do so. But it's something that we need to so here are the poses as it's been stretched out. So now when I hit play, it looks a lot better. If I want to repeat this walking sequence, what we can do is we can grab the whole thing, grab these keyframes, and copy them. I can click out over here and go paste. Then we go out. So let's clear. So from here, we want to go here. So we need to help figure out how to continue over. So at this point, using the move tool, guarantee then things are going to line up. Try again. We can see the first frame. We go here, the next frame is here, and the next frame is back there, so that is where we need to move that out, make sure we can see the final keyframe occurring. Now I can line that up. And now it just becomes a matter of lining up the keyframes, and it's going to be helpful to extend out the ground so that we can see where we are as I work my way across the project. So with this, I've been able to create a loop and we just need to position seems we're getting some weird visual effects occurring there. And just repeating that process of moving over till the onion skin layers start to line up. And as we do this, it will complete the process. So if I turn off onion skinning, zoom out, all right, so we're getting real close. And it seems that there's a little glitch when I was going through, and somehow when I moved the frames out, I ended up with a gap. So what we can do is extend out the artwork using F5. And if I select all of these keyframes and make sure that it treats them as motion keyframes, then we can be continuing. And now there's no more little glitchy flash where the artwork was disappearing on screen. So that's really it as far as doing the basic animation. Build the parent-child relationship, set your pivot points first, then build the relationship. If you're going to duplicate parts, then do it after that so you don't have to reset pivot points. That's useful. And reset the layer relationships. And finally then attach everything to a positioning peg. Once it's on a peg, then we can add in the keyframes, and you can keep using those frames over and over to build the animation. And then as you do that, we now have a walking cycle that looks reasonably convincing without having to do a lot of really complex frame by frame drawing. It was more a matter of creating the artwork in the first place and being smart about how that artwork is created, and that gives us better animation.